what is the reason why something is called asur, prohibited. So he dealt with it in the 6th chapter. The idea of something being prohibited, it's not just like Hashem decided at a certain point that like he stopped by certain items and he said, this meat or this item is going to be prohibited, and then there's the permitted which you're allowed to eat. When we say something is us or something is prohibited, it is intrinsically connected to the world of impurity. It's not like ini mini mani mo and he's stopped by that, and essentially there is no difference between the two, but it's just because Hashem decided that this is permitted and this is prohibited. It's not so at all. It's when Hashem says something is prohibited to eat, to consume, is because that is connected and anchored to a world of impurity. And Rabbi explained again also in the previous chapter, it's called asur. Asur means it's tied down.
Sometimes forbidden.
What? Forbidden, right? But why the lashon asur? Forbidden to eat. You say you're not allowed to eat it, or it's non-kosher. It's treif, like we know, it's classically known. What is the definition of asur? So when you think about Hashem matir asurim, Hashem undoes, in other words, it gives the ability of those who are incarcerated, tied down, and he alleviates them. We say this bracha in the morning because a whole night a person is in one position, and we thank Hashem that we're able to alleviate ourselves from that being tied down to one place and one bed, etc. And that's why we make all the brachas. And then, so similarly, when something is, and Hashem says you're not allowed to eat something, it's because that is, if we say it's asur, because it's tied down, it's anchored down to the world of impurity. As opposed to something mutar, for example, mutar means that it is permissible. Permissible in this context means that it's not tied down, it's not anchored to that world of impurity. So then the Rebbe began the 8th chapter by saying that when it comes to prohibited foods, another reason why it's called tied down, again, we elaborated on this in length. Always welcome to see the backups, the classes on it's online, each one of them. But the 8th chapter, which begins this oidzais, it's additional. When we deal with the machalas asuris, it's so tied down that even somebody ate something inadvertently. He didn't even know that it was asur, and he ate it for a godly purpose, and he made a bracha. And not only he had in mind when he ate it for a godly sake and for a godly purpose, but he followed through with the godly purpose. What does it mean someone eats something with a godly purpose? He eats it in order to gain strength. As an example, to do a mitzvah, or in this, Rabbi uses the expression here, to learn Torah, to daven. A person needs strength in order to serve Hashem. So he eats, and subsequent to his eating, with the strength of his eating, he goes ahead and learns a daf Gemara, for example, or learns any part of Torah, or he davens with that strength. So apparently everything just seems to be right. The problem is that what he ate was prohibited. So, like I say, it's just one detail, but the answer is an important detail. In other words, even he did it unintentionally, and he ate it for a godly sake, and he followed through with the godly sake. He davens and he learns with the strength of that food and that consumption of this food. The strength would he gain by eating this food. The problem is that it's not a detail. The food which he ate is asur. Again, we said it's incarcerated in the world of impurity. It's tied down. It's anchored to the world of impurity. So there's no elevation into the food which he ate. In other words, as we mentioned, again, elaborated on this point as well. Whenever a person eats, as long as what he eats is mutar, which means it's alleviated, it's not tied down to this world of impurity, and he eats l'shem shamayim, eats with a bracha and with a godly sake, and he follows through with the godly sake, means to say he learns Torah and he does and he prays with that energy, what he eats is the energy which he gained with this which he ate. There's a lot of things happening at the time. There's the godly spark which exists within this permissible food which is elevated. The entire, ultimately everything which he ate, as the Rebbe uses the expression, becomes like a sacrifice. Ultimately the sacrifice which was brought on the altar was an animal of flesh and blood. That because it was brought on the altar, it became a davar kaddish, it became something holy, which 2 minutes prior to being sacrificed on the altar, it was not a davar kaddish, it was just a classic animal. It's not unholy, but it's certainly not holy. But when it's brought on the altar, it becomes something holy. Similarly, when a person eats something l'shem shamayim, for a godly sake, this which he ate is not only the Torah is holy, the Torah which he's learning is holy, not only the prayer which he prays is a holy endeavor and holy experience, or the words of the prayers are holy, but more so this which he ate is elevated and becomes like a sacrifice, because this gives the energy for the person to daven or eat, to daven or learn, or do a mitzvah, etc. As opposed to if this which he ate is prohibited, so even everything else went right. He didn't even do it intentionally, and he did it l'shem shamayim, and he follows through with the shamayim. The problem is, that's why it's called asur, because it's so anchored in the world of impurity, it does not have any elevation at all. Al Rebbe added even things which are rabbinically prohibited, because Torah says it's asur. So it's asur means it's anchored in an impure world, and it's so anchored in an impure world we cannot elevate it. As opposed to something which is mutar, then if you eat it l'shem shamayim, it could be elevated. If you did not eat it l'shem shamayim, so it has its descend as well. Not only the experience, the actual food, or this is what you consume, also has its descend. What does it mean, descend in this context? It means to say because there's no godly and heavenly sake and purpose over here. The only advantage is that it's easier to elevate. You do tshuva. It doesn't, we've learned again in the 7th chapter, there's different levels of tshuva. Here you don't even need that intense level of tshuva, because what you ate, it was the reason why it fell to a lower level, it was basically circumstantial, because you did not eat it with a godly purpose. It's not intrinsically prohibited. So we concluded where we stopped last week was, so we could easily elevate it. The only problem is, after it's elevated, there's still a little stain which remains in the body, because everything a person eats or drinks ultimately becomes part and parcel of him. So when he consumed it, even though later he did tshuva, when he consumed this piece of meat as an example, this item of food, or he drank this, and it was kosher, but it was without a godly purpose. So because at the time when he consumed it was without a godly purpose, even though with that easier level of tshuva, again we're talking about something which is permissible, permitted, it's alleviated, it's not connected to that world of impurity, so it could be easily elevated, but because at the time when he consumed it, it was not l'shem shamayim. So a reshimu, which means a certain stain, remains in his body. As we explained last week, that sometimes you write something in a piece of paper and you take an eraser and you erase it, right? What happens then? The paper's pretty clear, but a little stain remains. Similarly, a little stain remains from this, and therefore, but because it wasn't asur, he doesn't need the punishment or the retribution of Gehenim. Now, it's interesting. This is the first time that Rebbe in Tanya mentions overtly the phenomenon of retribution, punishment. Gehenim even uses the word Gehenim, which many people, certainly it's not the school of thought, certainly not the doctrine of the Alter Rebbe to emphasize purgatory, the negative, Gehenim, and so on. And even if he does it in a different light. It's not chas v'shalom, the punishment, as like Hashem is, now you're in my hands, I will do with you what I want. You didn't follow and obey me when it was up to you. Now I have the ability to do chas v'shalom. David is certainly not like that. David just wants to take the neshama to a very good place, which is classically known as Gan Eden. So you cannot walk into an important place, into a palace, when a person's dirty or he has a bad odor coming from him. He has to be cleansed and he has to wash himself, because he's coming into a very special place. Similarly, after neshama leaves this world, there's so much to accomplish in this world, and ultimately every yid, even a rasha, even a person which is according to Torah is classified as the rasha, he's full of mitzvahs, and Hashem really wants to bring him to Gan Eden. He wants to bring him to this special place which is very close to Hashem, and it doesn't make sense that such a special place like Gan Eden, someone should walk in if his neshama is tainted or stained or blemished. And that's the point of Gehenna and purgatory. It's here to cleanse, and it's like you have, for example, a child who had glass in his foot. He cannot just go on easily. He's taken to the doctor, and the doctor takes rubbing alcohol, because you have to take out. This is dangerous, literally dangerous. But sometimes when you wash the one, you need to wash a stain. Some of the parents washes his child, and the stain doesn't come out. He puts on, let's say, a little water, which is a little hotter, not chas v'shalom, something which is really hot. But the kid's not comfortable with this cleansing process. He'd rather be dirty. Kids sometimes don't diaper me. Excuse the way saying it as it is. I'd rather not be diapered. I'd rather be dirty. But a parent wants the best for the child. He doesn't want the child to be dirty. Similarly, again, we can elaborate in this mashal, but the idea is understood. The whole phenomenon of punishment is because Hashem wants to just cleanse in the neshama. So there's different levels, because firstly, neshama is holy, so holiness and a blemish and an unpure blemish does not go inside. But especially when the Eibishter wants to take the neshama and reward it for its efforts, any level of efforts in this physical world, which is Gan Eden, and we know again there's so many levels of Gan Eden. Hashem wants to bring the neshama closer and closer to where Hashem is, where the state of the neshama, the natural state of the neshama, which is a state of holiness and sanctity. The problem is when the neshama comes up into after 120, because of his engaging, and again different levels of impurities, things which are again intrinsically impure, or this which we mentioned before, something which is permissible by the person who didn't eat it or didn't engage with it with a godly purpose, so there's a certain sense of impurity, and based on that, when the neshama comes in the heavens above, it has to go through a certain process of cleansing in order to get rid of the different levels of the stains. Sometimes you just need cold water, sometimes hot water, sometimes you need a real alcohol, sometimes to take off a stain. These are the different levels, but chas v'shalom, it's not like going to get you, chas v'shalom, not at all. So I'm saying this introduction because the first Perek Al Tirah elaborates on the levels of retribution. So in the last words which we finished in the last week, which we're going to pick up from over here, is that when it comes to something permissible, even the person did tshuva because the stain remains, but and in the same token it was permissible, so he doesn't have to go to Gehenna. There's no purgatory necessary for that. So then there is this idea which is called chibut hakever, that the malachim come and shake up the grave. We mentioned it's not something physical. And there's another idea which the Alter Rebbe is going to introduce over here, this kaf hakela, which we mentioned it last week as well, which is that two malachim take the neshama and they kind of toss it from one end of the world to the other. So let's not understand this as well. It's not physical. Alter Rebbe explains another classic work of his called L'Likutei Torah, that it's not something just, okay, we have you, we're going to play football with you. Again, this is a type of cleansing process. As we mentioned last week, sometimes you shake something, right? You have to dust something, so you give it a yank, a type of quick shake so the dust falls away. Or you throw something. Inevitably, when you'll throw it, when it comes to the other side, it'll be cleaner because it went through the certain state, place of wind or air, etc. So this is what they do to the neshama. This is not yet Gehenna. It's not yet purgatory. Purgatory is a little more serious. It's more like the hot water, or the alcohol, or the rubbing alcohol, etc. Here, again, and the reason, because it's not us, or he didn't engage. This is not. You're not talking about someone who's engaging in the prohibited. Something which isn't someone who's engaging. This is which is still permissible. So that's why he says the chibut hakever, the shaking up of the kever, or as we're going to learn now, this is where we stop. Al dvarim b'teilim beheter, that someone speaks words of vanity, in vain words, but again with beheter, it's not us. What does it mean dvarim? Because we know that the whole Torah mitzvahs is compartmentalized in thought, speech, and action, in the positive and the negative. Starting with action, which we don't have to bring any proof. The significant majority of Torah mitzvahs deals with the action: put on tefillin, put up a mezuzah, etc., etc. When it comes to negative, don't do that, don't eat that. It's also in action. Stay away from this, that, and the other. But similarly with speech, there is the yes and there's a no. Speech plays a role in the yes, verbally uttering the words of Torah, verbally uttering the words of prayer, verbally saying a bracha. Speech is a way we engage with Hashem through speech. And then in the negative, there's things at a time Hashem says, do not speak. In other words, the loisas express itself in speech as well. Do not speak lashon hara. Do not speak litzanis, which is kind of a loose laughter, which destroys any structure in avodas Hashem. It doesn't mean that periodically we're allowed to be loose, or the Gemara even says that the greatest sages prior to the beginning of their studies, the great and most serious shiurim they gave, serious classes they gave, they did say as kind of loose, jokey word in order to loosen the crowd. They should be able to pay attention after maybe a stressful day or whatever it is before they open the class. He would say something, and just to get the attention of the people, and then he would start the serious study. So when it serves the purpose for a godly purpose, it's fine. But litzanis is something on its own, which is just a constant, non-structured way of words and phrases, expression, which ultimately destroys structure. And again, in avodas Hashem, it's a destruction in the service of God. In general, a person has to, even a person to be successful with his responsibilities, just that extra loose laughter on a constant basis. It's something which should not be. It should not be experienced, and therefore become something prohibited. So we see again in speech, there's also that no, do not speak lashon hara, do not speak rechilus, not no litzanis, etc. And then thought plays a role. Kavanah in a mitzvah, in the time of the karbanis, the kohen had to have a certain way of thinking how when he did the karban, or again in the negative, he wasn't allowed thinking certain thoughts with the karban shouldn't be eaten, and he thought he wasn't allowed to think that it's going to be eaten at a different time than Torah dictates when the karban is allowed to be eaten, and similarly where it would be eaten, and also even without the karban. We know that Torah says that a person is not allowed to just entertain his mind. There's certain things, or in other words, that entertaining the mind with them is prohibited as well. It's a Fedish pasuk brought in Krishma, Suru, not only achrei diburchem, achrei levavchem, achrei nechem, things which are again associated with thoughts. So here, the Alter Rebbe speaks about the phenomenon of using speech, not something which is holy, but yet not something which is clearly prohibited or unholy. What is that? Dvarim betelim, words spoken in vain. Beheter, which means it's permissible. What does it mean permissible? If someone sits and learns Torah, he has the ability to learn Torah. And more so, he sits down, let's say, with a chavrusa, and he's not going to speak dvarim, things which are prohibited, like lashon hara, rechilus. He's just going to waste 20 minutes of that time. That cannot be classified as beheter. On the contrary, that's an Isser. He's transgressing because he set this time up to learn Torah, and he wastes his time, 20 minutes or even 20 seconds, let's say. Again, sometimes when someone wants to start something, so he just says if it contributes to the subsequent learning, it's fine. But just to waste time, you cannot classify that beheter. It's not permissible. So, what does it mean? Words, dvarim betelim beheter, words which are it's not associated, not with lashon hara, not with rechilus. There's nothing bad or inappropriate with the words. It's just he went and he came without any names, without any, you're not touching at all anything which is clearly classified by Torah as prohibited words. How could you describe that? So Alter Rebbe says, Kigain Amei Haaretz. Because someone who knows how to learn Torah, and he could spend his time with quality. In other words, his words could be qualitatively utilized with quality words of Torah. So then just to speak in words in vain, you cannot say it's permissible, you cannot say it's permitted to speak. No, it's a clear transgression because he has to learn. He can and he would utilize his time to learn Torah, speaking words. It's not words of Torah, so that's a prohibition. So where does Alter Rebbe find dvarim betelim beheter, things which are again words in vain, that they still be classified? They're permissible by Am Haaretz, someone who's a layman. He cannot learn Torah. He cannot. He has no understanding in Torah. Now today, just to say this parenthetically, don't want to waste any time on this, but today things are different. It's interesting. But this I cannot say, there's two ways of looking at it. Today there's a great level of amaharatzis, which means people who don't have any understanding of learning Torah because they weren't introduced to it. But someone who wants to learn Torah, on the other hand, conversely, as opposed to the yesteryears, it's much easier. You have so much Torah is so much more attainable today, in a sense, than 150 years ago. You open an art scroll, you open another book, and there's so many books. tens and hundreds and maybe thousands of books which are associated with learning Torah, that today anybody in so many languages, even if he doesn't speak English or any other common language, he could still learn Torah. And one could say, well, I'm bi'amoritz, I'm ignoramus, and therefore I don't have no connection to Torah. I'm saying this parenthetically because no one say, okay, I'm bi'amoritz, I don't have to learn. No. Today we're really lucky that the Torah is so much accessible. We have the enormous hands-on and accessibility to Torah like more than ever before. So, but let's try to look at it with the Alter Rebbe saying someone who is an amoris, he's truly an ignoramus. And again, it was something which you could even say more common in the previous years, in the yesteryears, where the person, he could have been a religious person, he davened and he knew how to say every bracha, but he was an ignoramus, he did not learn. So he's speaking dvarim b'teilim, he's speaking words in vain. You cannot classify this clearly that it's a prohibition. He just doesn't know how to learn. And he's lashon hara, he's not speaking, l'chilus he's not speaking, litzan he's not speaking, just stam words. So that is beheter. She'eni yachal ilmei, because he can't learn. But there's still a problem. So again, because it's not something prohibited, therefore Gehenim, in other words, that extra cleansing which is classically known as Gehenim, which is purgatory, you can't say he needs that level of cleansing, because the words he spoke were permissible. Yet because they still make some type of a lighter stain, but a stain it is on his soul. So he still needs to purify his soul from this impurity. The klipa zu of this klipa, which is a classical word used in something which is opposite to learning, to kedusha, to holiness. Again, the previous classes we elaborated on this quite a few times. Why is impurity called klipa? But we're not going to go there now. Generally, it's still divided. We cannot say that it's not something which is prohibited, so it's not the lowest level of impurity, but impure it is in comparison to kedusha. So he needs to purify his soul from this impurity. But how is it done? Not through purgatory, but gilgula b'kafakela, that again the neshama is thrown from one side to the other side, like it says in Zohar, Parshas B'Shalach Daf Nun Tes, and this is again a type of a cleansing process. Just want to say this, which we mentioned before, the Alter Rebbe writes in the Kutei Torah explaining this. It's not like they're just really playing football, the neshama is screaming. It's just the Alter Rebbe explains this again. It's not. I'm not going to go through the full explanation. I don't exactly know what it is, but he does explain, just to get the idea. When we say kafakela, that they throw the neshama from one side to the other. We gave an example last week. Someone, for example, steals. So he does it quietly in a very discreet manner. He doesn't realize it's his own shame. Imagine he comes into the house and all of a sudden the entire family is sitting around the table and he just pops in through the window. The shame, the enormous shame which he experiences in those few seconds is something that arouses an inner regret, much more than had he wouldn't find anybody around to be successful in that experience of that theft. Maybe 5 minutes or 5 hours or 5 days later, some thoughts of regret would come in. But because he's surrounded in this environment of successful stealing, if you will, so he doesn't see the terrible or the grave sin within it, because he's still in that environment, and that maybe that would cause him to steal again, especially to be successful a second time, a third time. But if he comes in and he sees the entire, this family which he thought no one was home, all of a sudden everybody's around. Now let's say he's a community member, or let's say he's a family member. That contrast to his ambition of wanting to steal, to seeing him finding everybody just around him, he just popped through the chimney and everybody is sitting there. And again, let's say he belongs to the community. That shame of that contrast, here normal, civil people sitting around and he's in that mode of stealing, that contrast hits him so hard at the time that it's not only regret, it's more than regret. He just doesn't find his place. Not only that he was caught red-handed, and the consequence, which they could harm him or put him into prison, whatever it is. They're not dealing with that. We're dealing with that experience of shame. What happened? He became a tzaddik? No, because had he wouldn't find this people around him, he would continue with his ambitions of stealing. It's just when he sees that stark contrast of normal people, civil people, and the way he is conducting himself, that hits him very hard. Similarly, that's the idea of kafakela. As long as we're in this environment, we don't see the graveness or environment of Elam Hazeh, we don't work on ourselves to refine ourselves, to elevate ourselves to some level, some spiritual level. It doesn't mean becoming a tzaddik. It doesn't mean becoming like this, like Avraham Avinu or Moshe Rabbeinu. A little bit, a tiny bit, elevating ourselves from the mundaneness, the crassness, the grossness of this physical world. So in a sense, we don't realize that whatever we're doing, in a sense, we find this being very normal. May it be open, overt transgression, what Torah says not to do, chas v'shalom. It doesn't hit us so hard, and especially things which are permissible, but again, overly engrossed or indulgent in the physical pleasures and delicacies of the world without a godly purpose. We don't find it so terrible because we're in this environment. When the neshama comes and is placed in a totally new holy environment, it's not that it's told, look what you did. It stands so shameful because it's in a holy environment. It sees how everything it was involved with was so antithetical to this environment which it's placed in. And it's explained very brief. That's the idea of kafakela. It hurts the neshama because it takes it to where it was and where it had the taiva, the passion and the lust and temptation to do this, that and the other, and all of a sudden they take it to another place which is a beautiful, warm, holy environment. So that shame itself slowly moves away, the different stains with the neshama accumulated through its engagement in these types of experiences and actions, or maybe thought, speech, or action. So here he says it's not yet Gehenna. Why? Because it was permissible, but a cleansing, it needs to be clean. And this is through klavakela. As opposed to, and Yadal Rebbe continues, words which are clearly, squarely prohibited. The Torah says it's prohibited. Like we said, litzanis, this extra constant looseness, loose laughter. V'lashon hara, which is clearly prohibited in the Torah. Do not speak lashon hara, Hashem says. Sorry?
Last question?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Just go back where moving back and forth. So what I'm hearing you saying is this person, whatever it is back and forth, so to speak, one end of the world, the other, identifying with that neshama, and then with this.
Right.
Is the purpose to change the neshamas or the person's outlook on life, or is it just some other purpose?
The purpose over here is, because we're dealing with the neshama after 120 years, is not, in other words, it's not something which is, we're not changing anybody. In other words, in the coming world there's no tshuva and there's no chances. In other words, the chances we have is in this world. Tshuva exists within this world.
So then what would be the purpose?
So what's the purpose? So this we mentioned before. So firstly, to make it very clear, this is especially just to point out, because you're pointing this out, I would just take another second to point out the preciousness of every moment in this world, like the Mishnah says, Yafa Shachas the Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim. One moment in repentance and good deeds in this world, which is greater than the entire world to come. Because this is a world that we can jump from the lowest of low to the highest of highs. Through tshuva, through ma'asim tovim, we have the ability, because we're still in the middle, we're still on the field, we're still on stage. In the world to come, the job is over. If Hashem decides to send your neshama down, which is it's a separate pain for the neshama, because the neshama really never wants to come here. It's just showing the virtues and advantages of fulfilling Hashem's purpose in this physical world, and that ultimately gains that, or it's told that this is really the place which you can reach higher heights than where you originally originated from, which is ultimately Gan Eden. But on its own, who wants to come down into this world? So if Hashem decides that He's going to resend the neshama, so it's not really another chance. It's like a new person, a new birth, a new child, a new body. But when the neshama is up there, the job is done. You're asking what the purpose is? As we said, as we began over here, that Hashem wants the neshama ultimately to go to Gan Eden, to receive its reward, to go to a place which is Kulei Kaddish, which is Kulei Tay, like it says Yom Shiv. So you cannot take him. So you want to invite somebody into your own home.
But that's a metaphor of physicality. We're talking about the spiritual.
Yes, but if the neshama is tainted and stained, if there's a blemish on the stain on the neshama, if there's an impurity of the neshama, how could the neshama come to Gan Eden? I'm using the example just to understand. Obviously, we're not talking about there's no physical palace, but you want to take somebody into your own home, and he has a bad odor. The first thing you're going to ask him, you take a shot politely, but you just want to make sure that he fits to the ambiance of your home. And the greater the home is, if it's like we gave the extreme example, king's palace, the cleaner the person has to be as he experiences this palace experience.
But the neshama, the person doesn't grow because you're saying there's no growth.
There's no growth, but the fact is that if there's a taint of the neshama, right, you could do something. So if the neshama is tainted, so the neshama has to be cleansed in order to go into Gan Eden.
But it sounds like a technical thing at that point because it has nothing to do with the person anymore.
Call it technical. Could the neshama be in Gan Eden when it has a stain? It obviously cannot. So Hashem wants to reward the neshama. Well, you can't say it's nothing removed from the reality of this world. The fact is, it's this neshama which made the effort in this world, which is being rewarded, right?
I'm confused because you use the word like shame and stuff like that.
Yeah.
If you have shame, then there's growth. Because if you have shame, then there's tshuva. So if this neshama is going back and forth and having shame, well,
right,
there's a change.
Right.
But you're saying that there's no change.
It is
growth. So
yes, but
I'm confused.
It's when the neshama in this world experiences something like that, because he's still in the marketplace. Right? The marketplace is always ups and downs, but you're on the marketplace. You can still grow. You can still invest. But once you come back home, there's no marketplace.
But it's back and forth.
In this case, it's just the shame removes the stain. That's the word. The shame of the neshama, that removes the stain which it accumulated through this engaging in this when it was in this world.
And we're not talking about shame the way we experience shame.
Why so?
Well, because then you're talking about personality and ego and breaking down ego and
well, it's obviously different because it's. I hear what you're saying, but it's not. It's obviously a different type of level of shame, but it's like like someone says, "Is what's Gan Eden? Hashem puts on a fire. You did this and that. We're going to put you in the fire." Right? Because we find in the Torah words of fire associated with Gehenna. But we have to understand, Hashem is Etzem HaTov L'Heitim. He's essentially good. And it's a similar, and we use these examples that a child, the example, for example, we gave before, this class example we gave before, you tell the child, I want to diaper you. I'm not interested in it, runs away. Right? The parent realizes something wrong, the child walk around with something dirty. Similarly, Hashem wants the neshama to be rewarded in Gan Eden. It cannot come in if it has any stain. So how do we get rid of the stain? When the neshama, so when you deal with a child, again, not to mix that physical example with the spiritual experience, but just to understand, you take a certain time, it's dirty, so that you take something cold. Then the colder water doesn't take off, so some more hot water. So these,
I'm trying to understand in the context of the neshama. Either maybe I'm thinking either or. Maybe that's not supposed to be like that, but it seems to me that either the person experiences shame and is changed through that process, as we would here, or it's some technical thing because the person doesn't change because they're not able to change. It's
not change which would lead to the next level of service to Hashem. It's a change in the neshama. The neshama, for example, you say, okay, now I took a shower and therefore I'm ready to go to the next meeting, right? But there's something, now I took a shower, I'm just clean for the sake of being clean. Why do I have to be clean? In this case, it's because Hashem wants to bring the neshama to Gan Eden. Not for you to exert yourself to make an effort in your avodas Hashem. That's over. Hashem wants to reward the neshama.
So then why use the word shame?
Why use the word shame?
Why use the word shame going back and forth?
Because shame is pain. Shame is pain.
I think I understand the question, and the way I would see the difference is that when we're in this world, we are still actors. We can act ourselves and change, whereas the description, particularly the slinging back and forth, it's one of tremendous passivity. So it seems that the neshama in the next world can be acted upon, but does not have the ability to bring about the change himself.
Exactly so.
But then there's still a sense of self in the neshama. But it's a passive
self in the context of the experience of its reward.
We talk about
so the neshama does. It's not just like the lights go
about
up.
Yourself, it's done too. It's like the neshama also has a reward when we do things for our parents in the next world.
As an example,
but they can't do it for themselves. We have to do it for them.
It's not like not just blanks out that there's no personality to the neshama. In the context of growing and doing tshuva, this is the marketplace here in this world. But the neshama does not expire from its person. On the contrary, it's a true expression of its true personality as a neshama, part of God, living in a godly world, Gan Eden. So all these things are
that makes sense.
Clear? Very good.
The passivity.
Very good. Thank you. Thanks so much. So we continue, as opposed to something which is diburim masurim, and thanks for pointing it out as well. Aval diburim masurim, words which are prohibited. And again, we see the word asurim, which they are essentially connected to the world of impurity. Like you give the example, it's Sanas Lashon Hara. This is where we hold. Okay, they come from the three levels of the shalish klipos atmeis, the three impure levels, and this we elaborated extensively in the previous chapters. Generally, the world of impurity is divided, something which is shalish klipos atmeis, which is the lowest, things which Torah says clearly, outright, do not do, do not engage, do not eat. This is something which ein lemaliyah, there's no way of elevating that. And like in halacha, someone can't say, I'm going to eat this non-kosher piece of meat because I'm going to gain strength to learn it to daven subsequently. Impossible. It is so full of tumah, you cannot elevate it. And then there's something which is called klipas nega, saying is very brief, klipas nega, which is the mediocre. It's not completely impure. It has nega, it has a little light, which let's say classically would be something like the apple. It's not non-kosher. On the other hand, there's nothing holy of the apple prior to you doing something good with it. So it's in the middle. And it's neutral, can go either way. It could fall into the world of impurity. When I eat the apple and feel so good, that gave me the energy to subsequently speak Lashon Hara. So I was sitting with a group of people, I was so tired and I was so weak, and I would rather leave the room. But there was served apple, so I strengthened myself with the apple to speak a piece of Lashon Hara, which is clearly shalish klipos atmeis, associated with the lower level of impurity. So that apple fell to the lower level of impurity. In the same token, that apple could be elevated to made a bracha on it. I eat it l'shem shamayim, for a godly sake, and I follow through with the shamayim. I learn Torah, I do a mitzvah, or I pray with the energy of that apple. That apple has been elevated, becomes kaddish, holy, like an oil, a carbon, like the sacrifice of the sacrifice when we mentioned. I'll try to use the lashon oil, that the quintessential sacrifice, because that's called klipos. It's in the middle, as opposed to here we're speaking about words which are lashon hara, something which is associated with a lower level, klipos atmeis legami. Then obviously ein kafakel levadim me'litayir. Then that kafakela retribution does not help to impurify it and to remove that impurity of the nefesh. At that point it has to go down to purgatory, because again it's associated with shalish klipos atmeis. The times of it, I don't really want to stop at the word Gehenim. It says never stop with it. That's how it says. You always try to finish with something positive. This is what we mentioned. Dvarim b'teilim, we said, when could it be classified as mutar if someone who's ignoramus, he cannot learn Torah? As opposed to someone who could learn Torah, and at the time and the opportunity he has to learn Torah, right? It's the same words, right? This man came to the market, or this blackberry, and this nothing prohibited in those words, but it gains at that point, because he's a person which can learn Torah, and he takes the time to occupy himself. Also in kafakela levada me'le nafshe lemarko lezachacha, that the kafakela itself, which we mentioned before, does not help for his soul to cleanse it and to purify it. Difficult retributions, punishments, which are punished for the bitul Torah, in other words, the wasting the time which could be utilized in learning Torah. The pratis, every single mitzvah say has another dimension, type of punishment. Additional to the overall punishment to every mitzvah say, which comes as a result usually of laziness, and it says it's Gehenim, which is again purgatory, but not of fire, but of snow, because here there's a difference of snow and fire. Look, we got to finish something a little bit positive over here, but we have another just few words over here. But just to understand why Gehenim shall sheleg, because fire, Gehenim is usually we understand Gehenim it's fire, is because ultimately it counteracts or it counters the fiery passion a person put into a particular Avera. Which every Avera, every lust, temptation, which is not associated with Kedusha, there's a certain passion. And passion is, you say, a fiery passion. So what counters that or cleanses that is the Gehenim, which is associated with Aish, fire. Here we're dealing with somebody who did not learn Torah. He was lazy to do a mitzvah, so he didn't put himself, he wasn't passionate about something, he just sat and did nothing in a time when he was supposed to be active. He was just sat, he was passive instead of being active. So it's a sense of laziness. So you can say that the Gehenim, which is supposed to cleanse in that sin, is a fiery Gehenim. So it says that's a snow, it's cold, very cold, which is supposed to counter that laziness, which is there's no passion and laziness. That's why it says Gehenim shel sheleg. And then we'll stop over here, but just let's see a few words over here. Then there's another idea of somebody who studies secular studies. Wow, that's pretty strong. Most of us do, right? Is there a problem with that? So the first thing is, well, today is going to conclude. I thought we'd be able to conclude the chapter. We will not be able. We'll conclude it next week. Most of us study secular studies. Rebbe deals with this in a very interesting way. Secular studies, let's say a person has a certain amount of time to learn Torah, or to do something, to utilize his mind, something which is Torahic, or part of a mitzvah, or part of understanding. In other words, Torah is associated with intellect and brain, and he utilizes his mind for secular studies. So if he does it for the sake of parnasa, wants to become a doctor, wants to become a lawyer, it's wonderful, because what is the difference? Someone becomes a truck driver, he has to spend a certain amount of time learning how to drive, and actually driving, puts his mind into some great study, and ultimately, or medicine, or ultimately, which is ultimately helping people. But the idea that occupies his mind, which he can make up a parnasa through these secular studies, it's wonderful. But here we're dealing, let's say, with somebody. So Rebbe gives two exclusions. One, somebody does it for the sake of parnasa, right? A successful doctor, successful lawyer. A successful lawyer is wonderful according to Torah. But then there's even the Rambam, the Ramban, great sages, which were very knowledgeable of all areas of life, even though they didn't. Even Rambam actually was a doctor, but it wasn't. They didn't engage in these studies because of their parnasa, because of their livelihood. They had a special reason, each one of them, why they adapted and why they got involved in having. Not only got involved, they had a vast knowledge in secular studies. But this is again, they had the ability to serve God with these studies. Sometimes on the surface, the Rambam himself says, when it comes to astronomy, figuring out the Kiddush HaChodesh, in the Rambam himself says, so the Greek philosophy contributed to his explanation of the Kiddush HaChodesh. So he says it clearly in Halacha. It's not like we found it like as a script. He writes it in Halacha of Mishnah Torah. The Greeks were very knowledgeable in astronomy, and this contributed to my understanding of Kiddush HaChodesh. So the things in which we saw overtly how the secular studies not only contributed to their livelihood as parnasa, but even to understanding ideas of Torah. So then it becomes also davar kadosh, something holy, right? But then there's different great sages which did not write halacha like the Rambam, but they had their reasons. So these are the two exclusions, which again we'll touch upon. But yet, let's say somebody has nothing. He has no reason to become. He's not planning to become a doctor, not a lawyer, and not anything else. He has the ability to learn Torah, and instead of learning Torah, he just flips open a book which deals with some type of secular study. So it's not the secular study is intrinsically evil, because if it was intrinsically evil, we would never be able to utilize it for something holy. The problem is that if he has no reason, he's not this great tzaddik or this great someone like the Rambam or the Ramban or anything similar, and at the same token he's not planning to become this doctor or lawyer just to use this time, then there is two problems. One, that he's wasting his time, again, instead of learning Torah, he's wasting his time in secular studies. Then there's another problem that Rabbi is going to touch over here, is that the mind is the greatest gift which Hashem gave us. Rabbi is going to differentiate between Dvarim B'Teilim, just nonsense, the iPad 4, the iPad 5, these are just nothing wrong, not intrinsically wrong or intrinsically impure. They're just Dvarim B'Teilim, but anybody can speak it. when you utilize the greatest gift of all, which makes man man. Man is the superiority of man over any animal is two things, really, the ultimately connected, is the brain, the power, the intellect, and the power of speech. When we utilize our intellect with secular studies without any purpose at all, additionally being a problem of Bittul Torah, there's something that we took a gift which Hashem gave us, which is the intellect. And Hashem gave us the clip, in other words, which is learning Torah, things which we have in order to enrich in our intellect, and we use it for something else. So there's another problem more than just speaking simple words that anybody can speak. So that's how Rabbi deals with it again on a good note to the exclusion that someone does know how to utilize it, primarily for parnasa, which is everybody, whoever needs the parnasa, and that, or these great people who utilize it for Torah for the reasons they had, that it again becomes a dover kaddish, something essentially holy.
What about if a man learns Torah every day?
Yes.
But he has a very good mind, and he also enjoys learning about history and philosophy and secular matters.
So,
assuming he's kovei itim.
You're asking a question. You know, there's a broad bracket between the two extremes which we just mentioned. When you say he enjoys, if you're going to say that he enjoys learning Torah, but he just wants to read about this, that, and the other.
In addition to, not instead of.
I understand.
Yeah.
In addition to, if you look at it dryly, with the words you're using, it's a problem. Because Hashem gave him the intellect, and not only that, it's a mitzvah to learn Torah really every moment, for that matter. If someone has 24 hours, he has the ability 24 hours later to learn Torah, and he learns 23 hours. We're not talking about classically the mitzvah of limud Torah, and he learns 23 hours and 59 minutes. He did not learn Torah in a complete manner. And it's the only mitzvah, for that matter, different than all the mitzvahs which we have, like shaking the lulav and esrog. When you shake once the lulav and esrog, there's no point of doing it again. It's really pointless. It's not even a hither to do it again. You did it once, there's no point to do it the next day. The only mitzvah that there's no such a thing you say, I've had enough of, is learning Torah. And it's really the only mitzvah. That is limud Torah. So really we have to learn Torah every moment. Classically, right? Before we go, so why aren't we learning Torah every moment? So the person has to work, he has to make a parnasa. If he sits in yeshiva, who's going to give his... So therefore there's a concept that someone's koveya itim la Torah. Because according to Torah says you have to stop at a certain point, you have to go make a living. So you have your kviyas itim la Torah. But now you're dealing with somebody who he has a full hour that he could learn, and he wants to take a half an hour learning and a half an hour reading a book. There's really a problem with that. But then there's somebody, for example, like I say, that's why I cannot nail it down. There's somebody that he really cannot learn more than a half an hour, at least at the time now. Maybe he's going to grow, that next year he'll learn 45 minutes, but right now he can. And when you say he enjoys reading a book, that enjoyment will contribute to his sanity, to his tranquility, to his, let's say, inner contentment, which he's going to be a better husband and better on the job and better maybe even his learning. So then it's not clearly black and white anymore, right? So really it's a case-by-case idea, and no one can really nail it down, and really someone has to be honest with himself. Why am I reading the book? Is it the latter, or is the first case that I really have the same enjoyment in learning a piece of Gemara, but I want to stop learning Gemara and reading the book? There could be a problem. But if reading the book will do something else to me in my harmony with myself and with the people around me, and I cannot learn for such a long time, he should deal with his rabbi. It doesn't mean that it's not necessarily black and white there. It becomes another gray area which he has to dissect and see what is truly happening in it. So I cannot. You're giving an example. It's a real case by case, person by person, time by time. Not every time we're even the same person. Today he's like this. Tomorrow he's different.
Do women have less of a problem with secular studies that are not leading directly to parnasa? You don't have the same chiyuv in Torah learning? Excellent
question. Firstly, I just want to, you're asking the question, we have to just know this, that women have to know that on the overall they do not have the same chiyuv of limud Torah, but in the same token, sometimes it's taken to another extreme, that really Torah is not pertinent to us. Most of the mitzvahs are divided in leisaseh, mitzvah. So before we do the mitzvah, which women are obligated, every mitzvah leisaseh, which a man is obligated, women are obligated. How much Torah are they supposed to learn? A lot, because they really have to know how to keep Shabbos and have to do all those things that they're not allowed to do. So first we have to know that when we say women are not obligated to learning Torah, on a practical term, there's a lot they have to know. And even the mitzvah say shazman grama. And then let's say there's this famous 6 mitzvahs which are called mitzvot midiyot, loving Hashem associating with the oneness of Hashem, fearing Hashem, that really is irrelevant, man or woman. How much does a woman have to learn? A lot in order to live the life of emunah, av, of yira. So first of all, yes. I'm just saying. So I just took a step before. We have to know that a woman learning Torah is not completely separated from a woman, just even on the most practical, pragmatic levels of a woman which has so many mitzvahs to keep, and all the mitzvahs Leisa said. In the same token, she doesn't have that obligation of learning Torah for the sake of learning Torah. So because she doesn't have that obligation, you can definitely say that the picture changes over here as a result. You can definitely say that the picture changes as a result, even though with the secular studies, there's, once we go secular, especially in a world like today, does it mean that the whole market, the secular market, is open to us? It could be a problem. How much impurity a woman could bring into her mind, because I'm not learning Gemaras. I could read every book, magazine, you name it, or article, because I'm not so anchored limited. That's also incorrect. So really, once we have that foundation, we could definitely work. But the answer, I would say yes to your question, is yes.